Our front bench is back to talk about this. Louis Hammond, Dimitri Soudis, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. Laura, once again, you're doing all the hard work, yelling the questions at Premier Ford. We get your, we hear your voice all the time. What do you think really happened here, and what does it say?
Well, I mean, I think I'll start with the second part of the question. I think it says, I mean, clearly they're not all on the same page now, right? I mean, the Premier Ford, we used to think maybe it was an act that Ford and Carney were doing good cop, bad cop, and Premier Ford was saying the quiet part out loud, and that was to the benefit of Canada. I think now it's pretty evident with Prime Minister Carney saying that he apologized to President Trump for offending him, that he wouldn't have run the ad. He tried to warn Premier Ford, and Premier Ford is saying that he has a different recollection of that, not getting into specifics, but that clearly suggests he didn't feel that he was warned. I think it shows that you know, for the first time probably in this trade dispute, that the premiers, some of the premiers, are not in line with the federal government, and there's cracks starting to show. I mean, whether that's an issue of management between the prime minister and the premiers, and we also know that Premier Ford and Premier Canoe and others have been asking for a meeting, a first minister's meeting with the federal government now. They clearly don't feel in the loop, and so you know, you're starting to see some freelancing. And I think Premier Ford thinks he's doing what is best for his province now, and Prime Minister Carney is trying to kind of manage all these different expectations. But it shows, you know, that they're not all in line together, and there's question, I think, about Canada's strategy now. And there's a communication element with both the premiers behind the scenes and the public as to what Canada's plan is going forward. And I'm not sure we have a sense now of the end game here on the part of the federal government.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Louis, I wondered, like, as I listened to both the Prime Minister and the Premier, the line of delineation appears to be like, how hard do you go back at Trump, right? And the Prime Minister seems to think that putting anything that irritates the president in front of him is not going to help their strategy, whereas the premier seems to be reflecting, you know, I think in large part public sentiment to not just kind of sit there and take the berating from Trump. What do you make of that dividing line, and can it be bridged?
Well, quite frankly, Vashi, I find it quite unfortunate, and not to say pathetic, that we're still talking about this 10 days on. I mean, this should have been mopped up and wrapped up a week and a half ago, as soon as the decision to actually pull the ad was made. Here we are, 10 days later, still talking about this front page news. I mean, you know, we got to get it together here. I agree with Laura when she says that what this tells me, obviously, there are cracks that are starting to show in the unity that we were able to have after Donald Trump was elected. But clearly, you know, the federal government has got to do a better job at getting the ducks in a row with respect to this, stop people talking out of school, and move on. I mean, people at the White House must be watching this laughing, quite frankly. One thing I'm going to say, though, is, you know, in politics, I've always said people tend to reward courage and courageous decisions. Can courageous decisions be sometimes unfortunate decisions or even stupid decisions? Sure they can. But I would, honestly, I would put anyone to the test. Go out there and ask Canadians as to whether they agreed, you know, how Doug Ford did this and why he did it. Most people are going to say yes. But again, you know, we shouldn't be focusing on who said what when and he said and he said. I mean, that's not important anymore. We really need to move on in the circumstances and get that unity back together, because while we are arguing about this, Vashi, they're still punishing tariffs against aluminum, steel, the auto industry, softwood lumber, and that's not even to say that, you know, the renegotiation of CUSMA. So we really need to sort of get it together and sort of, you know, put this behind us and move on.
Dimitri, what do you think is the best prescription for doing that? Like, how does, I guess, is it, for example, the federal government spending more time like they did in British Columbia today, perhaps like informing premiers of the entirety of what's going on behind the scenes, the strategy being employed? Like, if you're not going to tell Canadians why you want to apologize, you know, to the president, or why it's so important, I should say, that you view it as important, like, should you be telling the premiers? Is there cause for a meeting? What do you think? What's the prescription?
Well, I think the prescription is to not promise that you will solve a problem because you are the only one that can do it. Mark Carney committed to a deal by the G8. There was no deal. Then he committed to a deal by July. There was no deal. He then recommitted for a deal sometime in August. I don't blame a single premier, and I see Premier Every sheepishly saying that they're going to pull the ads. His softwood lumber sector is at risk. Premier Ford and Ontario have been threatened to literally lose the entire assembly of the auto sector. Same thing for steel. Aluminum in Quebec, softwood lumber in Atlantic Canada and in Quebec. So the absence of a deal is what is yielding the fact that there are cracks in this unity. And then you have Mark Carney, who tells Canadians, elbows up, and he apologizes. He apologizes to Donald Trump over something that he should have never apologized over. Why shouldn't he have apologized? Because the ad was accurate. It was quoting a Republican President, Ronald Reagan, who is a stalwart in the Republican movement in the United States. He was quoting him accurately. And here, domestically, the biggest challenge for the Liberals, back to tomorrow's budget, is they're going to be basically announcing a stimulus package. Their biggest challenge is not going to be writing the budget, but actually implementing this stimulus package, which will ensure that we ultimately reduce our dependency from the American market. It's going to have to be, people talk about pipelines. It's not how much money the government's going to invest in pipelines. It's allowing for pipelines to be built to the West Coast and to the East Coast so we can export some of our natural gas and some of our oil to other countries other than the United States, to whom we are currently selling our crude oil at a discount, and then the Americans sell it back to us with a markup.
A lower discount thanks to TMX, but I digress. Still at a discount. Kathleen, the last word goes to you, and my question is about what has occurred between the Premier and the Prime Minister, and largely, do you think a First Minister's meeting is enough to bridge the gap?
I think certainly Prime Minister Carney, post-tabling this budget, needs to convene a meeting with the premiers. I think, having LeBlanc heading out to BC today was important, but I think convening everyone to get them on the same page, to make sure they're singing from the same song sheet, so to speak, is critical. Many of us on this panel, Dimitri for sure, and I have run, advertisement campaigns in the past. And in this case, Prime Minister Carney is the campaign manager right now of this, getting a deal with the United States. He's been very clear on that. It's the federal government leads this process. And I think in reflecting on the ads that the Ontario put out, I'm not sure in the end, who their audience was. Because sometimes you do ads and that ad might have been more for a domestic Ontario audience than really for a United States one. And was it a mistake in the end? It frustrates me to no end that, Premier Ford is out there crowing about his media coverage when the fallout hasn't actually been that great from the ad. I get it. Everyone in Canada is still spoiling for a fight. I love a good political fight myself, but I'm not sure in the end if the Prime Minister did tell him not to run the ad, or his chief of staff or whatever, if it was right for the Premier Ford to move ahead and do that. And the question was, he was also only elected several months ago, and is he fulfilling his mandate to Ontarians? $75 million for that ad to roll out. Is that the best focus of Mr. Ford's energy, or should he be working more so to figure out how we can get a deal?
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I appreciate all your time. Thank you so much, our front bench, Louis Hammond, Dimitri Soudis, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone.